Hello, everybody. My name is Blackheart. I'm a writer, and I'm going to be reading a story from my upcoming horror collection. So let's get into it. When a Bell Tolls in the Woods. I was never particularly close to my grandfather when I was younger. I would visit with my parents from time to time, but that was it. But one day, everything changed. We received a homework assignment for history class. We were asked to interview war veterans about their experiences. I had heard the adults mention in passing that my grandfather had lost his leg in the war, so I figured he would have some stories to tell. I called my grandparents and arranged to stay overnight. Then I took the bus there. After dinner, I was alone in a small room with my grandfather for the first time in my life. Could you tell me about the war you fought in? I wasn't sure which one it was. I'm doing this for homework. I'm sorry, I can't help you there. I didn't fight in a war. What? I thought that was how you lost your leg, I said, shocked. Grandfather shook his head. No, I didn't lose it in a war. He fell silent for a moment. I've never told this to anyone. It was long before the wars. I was a boy. It was before my family moved to Poland. We lived far north in Siberia. Our village was small, and the school was in another, bigger village. We'd have to wake up at 4 a.m. and walk to school for hours. Usually, there was a group of us kids going. The school had a bell. They would ring it before the class began, and when it ended. We'd always know we were almost there when we heard it. One day, I had to leave school early to help my mother. I had a note to show the teacher. I had walked home from school many times, but perhaps because I was alone for the first time, I got lost. I thought I followed the path we had all taken in the morning, but it was snowing that day, and our tracks must have gotten buried under the snow. I walked thinking I was heading home, but at some point, I knew I should see a tree. There was this big tree we would always pass. I couldn't find it. Nothing looked familiar, and it started to get dark. I tried to follow my own tracks back to school, but the snowfall had covered them as well. I was lost and pretty scared at this point. It was getting dark. I was always told to stay with a group of kids because wolves and bears won't attack a large group. But now I was alone, with no way to get home. I thought I was a goner, but then I heard a bell in the distance. I felt so happy. I thought I must be close to the school. It was around the time classes would normally end, I think. Well, it had sounded far away and in a completely opposite direction than I thought I had come from. I was certain it was the school bell. I ran towards that sound, thinking that any minute I will see the building and my friends leaving. But all I saw were trees. I wondered if I had gone in the wrong direction again. They usually rang the bell 3 times when the classes started, and 2 times when it ended. I never heard the second bell. I thought that I had missed it. So certain that if I had heard the bell one more time, I would be out of the woods. And I did hear it, Grandad continued. Only this time it sounded even further away and to my left. When I heard it the first time, it had sounded more on my right. Regardless, I ran towards the sound. The snow was so deep I was sinking into it up to my waist. I was cold and hungry, and I wanted desperately to go home. What happened next? I asked. How did you get out? He sighed. I really don't know if it's a good idea to tell you the rest. You probably won't believe any of it anyways. Maybe, but I have no way of knowing unless you tell me. I need you to understand that times were different back then, but I don't want you to think that we were some sort of fools who didn't know what rational thinking was. We had our local stories and superstitions, that much is true, but that doesn't mean we were jumping at shadows and burning witches. Grandpa, what are you trying to say? Well, maybe you will understand once I tell you what happened, but then again, even I don't fully understand what happened to me in those woods. All I know is that I was lost, alone, and it was getting dark. I was really scared of the wolves and the bears. The snow was deep, and I decided not to walk that way. I was tired, and at this point, I was starting to realize that I would have to spend the night in the woods. Thought that I would wait till morning, and once I heard the bells again, I could follow them back to school. I was too afraid to sleep on the ground, so I climbed a tree as high as I could. Wolves wouldn't reach me there. Now, a bear could climb a tree, but most bears slept during winter, but not always. I don't think I slept at all that night. I just sat there in a tree, holding on to it so I didn't fall. It was cold, and I was shaking. It was dark, and the snow was all I could see. I had walked those woods to school and back home almost every day. I knew the sound of birds and animals from a young age. People who lived surrounded by the woods all knew these things. That night, I heard a sound that I had never heard before. It had been a quiet night. One thing I knew about the woods is that they are almost never quiet. Even at night, there would be sounds of animals moving, nightbirds, wolves. That night, it was dead silent. I only noticed the silence when I heard something like footsteps. I listened, and there was something about them that didn't seem right. Wolves always moved in packs, and they howled. It wasn't wolves. It wasn't deer. It was small. It honestly sounded like a human walking in the snow. Granddad sighed heavily before continuing. I began to think that somebody else was here. There's somebody else was lost, or my parents and friends were looking for me. I had turned off my lantern to conserve light. Now I thought about turning it back on to signal for this person. I heard footsteps, a cracking branch further away. Before I lit my lantern, I called out to this person. The moment I did, I heard those footsteps grow faster as if somebody was running towards the tree I was in. Now remember, the snow was deep enough to reach my waist, and yet this person moved so fast that it was below me in seconds. I never heard an answer, but I heard shuffling and footsteps running below the tree. Whoever it was seemed to be running in circles around the tree I was in. I got scared and didn't light my lantern. The tree was bare, and I thought that it was strange that I couldn't see anybody. I looked down and tried to follow the footsteps, but I saw nothing. I heard it though. I felt the tree shake. It was like this person was trying to shake me out of it. I held on, but my lantern fell. I cried. Eventually, it stopped shaking the tree, and I could hear it walk away into the woods. I didn't come down until daylight. Once I had come down, I looked around for the footprints of this person or whoever it was there last night. The only ones I found were my own. I searched for my lantern. I found the hole where it had fallen, but the lantern was gone. Animals have no need for such things. Besides, I know of no animal or human who could walk on snow and not leave a single trace. I tried to think of what it could have been. The only thing I could think of was that it was a nightmare, but I knew I had not slept that night, and a dream would not explain my lantern disappearing. I was too frightened to remain here. tried walking around the deep snow area by going to where the trees were denser. Dense evergreens caught more snow, so there was less of it on the ground. It was still deep, but only to my knees. I had walked some distance away from where I had spent the night, and I heard it again, the sound of a bell. Now I knew it couldn't be the school bell. They didn't ring it at this time of day. I remember the church in the bigger village had bells that they would ring sometimes. I thought that I was close to a town, perhaps the one I knew, or perhaps a different one, and if I got to it I could ask somebody to take me home. This hope is what drove me forward. I found strength to walk towards the direction of the bell despite the deepening snow. I was waist deep in it once more, but I kept pushing on. I walked up a small hill, hoping to see a town. It sounded like the bell was coming from somewhere close, but then it suddenly stopped. Beyond the hill was not a town, Grandad said grimly. Perhaps there had been one long ago, but not anymore. It was a single, dilapidated building. It might have once been a church, I don't know. The moment I set foot there, I had this feeling that I shouldn't be there. I can't explain it. I figured I would cross the clearing and continue forward. I had a feeling I should leave as quickly as possible, but I was also curious. What had made the bell sound? It didn't look like there was a bell in the bell tower of that building. I thought it came from the town further away. Had many unsettling feelings being in that place. I almost felt watched at times. I looked around, but never saw anything. In all that time, I had not heard or seen a bird. It had been dead silence since last night. Now I told you we had our own stories. They were mostly superstitions to scare kids into behaving. But there was one that I heard whispered by the adults when they thought we kids couldn't hear. They would say there was a bad place in the woods. They would say that people who go off the path disappear. They would say that if a child was badly behaved or unwanted, they would take that child into the woods and leave it there. I had always assumed they were superstitions. Warnings about dangers in the woods and getting lost. Stories to make kids listen to the adults. The thing about stories, though, is that sometimes they might be true. Despite the many feelings of danger I had, I looked inside it. I went to the old church and looked inside it. There wasn't much space in there. The roof had caved in. There was a foul smell inside it, like a barn and something rotten. There was what looked like mud, feces, and bones all over the place. The bones were piled in the middle. Some were animal, like deer, and some were, well, human. I saw a few skulls that were human at that pile. And on top of that pile was my lantern. I remembered the stories then. Last night had not been a dream. My lantern wasn't dragged here by some animal. Something lived here. Something that wanted to make me its next meal. I realized this was the bad place the adults had talked about. That thing that shook the tree had to be the monster that they all talked about. The one that would eat misbehaving and unwanted kids left in the woods. It would also eat anyone who got lost like I did. I realized that I was in danger, and that thing would come back here soon. I felt this incredible and powerful desire to live. I was determined to get out alive no matter what, to see my mother and father again. I knew deep down in my heart I had been a good child and I did not deserve to be eaten like the bad ones. Granddad laughed at his little joke. Of course, I'm only joking. Nobody deserves to be eaten by that thing, good or bad. I remembered the bells I heard. I knew there must be a town around here, but the bells didn't ring long enough for me to follow them back. I would wander around in circles and die here while being close to home at this rate. I thought that I needed a way to tell people I was here. Didn't have a bell, but my lantern still had some oil, and I still had some matches. The old building was made of wood, so I poured out all the oil left around the small space. The roof had been made of straw, but they were frozen. My matches had gotten wet while I was walking through the deep snow. I took my books, my expensive school books that had nearly cost my parents all they had, and started tearing the edges and corners off of them. It had taken me a long time, but I managed to start a fire. I fanned the flames with my book and prayed that the smoke would get high enough so someone could see it. In my effort to save myself, I had lost track of time. I let my guard down. I forgot where I was. I realized I had made a mistake. Something screamed at the edge of the clearing, though I could hardly call it a scream. I had never heard such a sound. I dropped my book and ran. I heard the snow crunch as something chased me. There was still light left, but it was waning. I tried to look at what chased me. I couldn't see it. Sometimes I think I could see a glimpse of it, something smoke-like, but shaped vaguely like a human, like a smoky silhouette moving through the woods. I don't know how I knew it, but I had a feeling that if I didn't get away from it while it was still light, I would be a goner. Somehow I just knew that in the dark it would be stronger. I also knew deep down that somebody will see the fire and someone will come. I knew I couldn't get too far from the clearing or else I would get lost again. I needed to stay close. I needed to get away from it. So I did what had worked last time and climbed a tree. Only in my rush, I made a mistake. I held onto the tree while I heard it moving around. I could hear snarling and growling. I was afraid once more. I prayed that my tired arms would hold out. It slowly got darker. I tried to keep myself awake, hungry, tired, and cold. My strength was fading. This tree was thinner. There were no thick branches for me to stand on. I took off my gloves because they made my hands slip. I had wrapped myself around the tree, tried to keep a tight hold on it, so I wouldn't start sliding down. I prayed that it wouldn't shake the tree, because I was certain I would fall if it did. I knew that I could not keep holding on forever. I began to yell for help, and I yelled until my voice was nearly gone. I'd put all my effort into screaming for help, so I didn't notice what the creature had been doing. I just suddenly felt the tree lean forward. It was falling, and so was I. I let go of it, thinking I needed to run. But when I fell to the ground, a weight fell on top of me. It was the tree. I was pinned down, and I knew that thing was right behind me. Then I felt it. The sharp pain as teeth sunk into my flesh. I cried and screamed until I blacked out. I woke up days later in a hospital. The fire did attract attention, and people came to put it out. They found me half dead and bleeding under a fallen tree. My parents had gotten word about it. They had been looking for me, and when they found me, people contacted my parents. My leg could not be saved, and it had to be cut off. I told my parents and anyone who would listen about the thing in the woods. Nobody believed me. They told me it must have been a bear that woke up too early. They all agreed I was lucky to be alive. But I know it had not been a bear that did this. I don't know if it was some monster from legend or some human that had gone savage, but it wasn't a bear. I believe you, Grandpa, I said shakily. I couldn't really imagine why someone would lie about something like this. Sure, being hunted by a supernatural entity would make it scarier than losing a leg to a bear, but then Granddad would have told the story to anyone who would have listened if he was doing it for attention. Yet, he always talked very little, and I've never heard him tell this story before. While I'm not entirely certain what really happened, or if it happened like he said he did, I don't think he made it up either. I know one thing, this story will stay with me for the rest of my life.